mountain villages where people routinely live past 100 years old and they've never seen the inside of a gym or counted a single calorie. And
That's fascinating because these communities seem to have unlocked something we're desperately trying to recreate with our modern wellness trends. The Hunza people in northern Pakistan are a perfect example.
you know what's really interesting about the Hunza? Their daily routine involves constant movement at high altitudes, around 8,000 feet above sea level. Their bodies have adapted to function with less oxygen, which some researchers believe contributes to their exceptional longevity.
And they're not just surviving at that altitude, they're thriving well into their 90s and beyond, still working in their gardens and walking mountain paths daily.
Speaking of natural movement, I've been experimenting with barefoot running lately. The science behind it is pretty remarkable. Our feet have over 200,000 nerve endings that are basically dormant in modern shoes. When we run barefoot, these nerve endings come alive and completely transform our movement patterns.
That connects directly to what they call earthing or grounding, right? The idea that direct contact with the Earth's surface has measurable effects on our body's electrical state.
Exactly. Studies have shown that grounding can reduce inflammation and improve sleep patterns. But here's what's really wild. These mountain communities get this benefit naturally, along with something else we're just starting to understand: cold exposure.
Oh, you mean like the Wim Hof method that's becoming so popular? The combination of cold exposure and breathing techniques.
Right, but these communities have been practicing their own version for generations. The Hunza, for instance, regularly bathe in glacial waters that rarely get above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Research shows this kind of cold exposure activates brown fat cells and can boost metabolism by up to 350%.
Well, that's incredible. And they're doing this without any formal training or scientific understanding. It's just part of their daily life.
And let's talk about their diet, because this is where it gets really interesting. These communities consume about 1/5 the amount of sugar we do in the West, and their meat consumption is roughly 10% of what the average American eats.
That's such a stark contrast to our modern diet. What are they eating instead?
Their diet is about 70% plant-based, with a heavy emphasis on raw foods and fermented vegetables. But here's the kicker: they're not just eating differently, they're eating less frequently. Many of these communities naturally practice what we now call intermittent fasting.
You know, it's remarkable how many modern health trends seem to be rediscovering what these communities have known for centuries.
And we haven't even touched on their brain health practices. These communities naturally engage in what neurologists now call neurobics, constantly challenging their brains through varied activities and social engagement. Studies show their rates of dementia are practically non-existent.
That makes so much sense when you consider how their lifestyle keeps them mentally engaged, from navigating terrain to maintaining social connections.
Here's something that really puts it in perspective. In Vilcabamba, Ecuador, another one of these longevity hotspots, researchers found that the average 70-year-old has the cardiovascular capacity of a 40-year-old American, and they're achieving this without any formal exercise program.
So what do you think are the key takeaways we can apply to our modern lives?
Well, looking at all the data, it seems to come down to three main principles: constant natural movement instead of scheduled exercise, a primarily plant-based diet with minimal processing, and regular exposure to natural stress factors like cold and altitude. But perhaps most importantly, none of these elements exist in isolation. It's the synergy between them that seems to create these extraordinary results.
That really challenges our compartmentalized approach to health and wellness, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And maybe that's the biggest lesson here: health isn't something you do, it's something you live. These communities aren't trying to be healthy. They're just living in harmony with their environment and their body's natural rhythms. I've been studying the Emerald Tablet, and it's mind-blowing how this ancient text predicted some concepts we're only now understanding through quantum physics. The famous line, "as above, so below," suggests patterns repeat at all levels of reality, something we now see in fractals and atomic structures.
So these weren't just failed experiments by medieval mystics.
Not at all. Take the Rosarium Philosophorum. It's actually a sophisticated psychological manual disguised as chemistry. When they talked about transforming lead into gold, they were really describing the process of personal transformation.
You know, that reminds me of how Jung used alchemical symbolism in his work. He saw these texts as early attempts to understand the unconscious mind, right?
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Paracelsus, this 16th century physician, actually bridged the gap between alchemy and modern medicine. He was the first to suggest that specific diseases needed specific cures, which was revolutionary at the time.
So how did these ideas survive through the centuries? I mean, they must have faced some serious opposition from the church and early scientists.
Well, that's the fascinating part. They encoded their teachings in complex symbols and metaphors. The 4 stages of alchemy, nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, and rubedo, these weren't just about chemical processes, they were describing stages of psychological development.
That's making me think about how we still use chemical metaphors today, like when we talk about people having natural chemistry or needing to decompress.
Right, and modern neuroscience is actually validating some of these ancient insights. Studies show that personal transformation follows predictable patterns, just like the alchemists suggested. They were essentially early psychologists using the language of their time.
But what about the practical applications? How can understanding this history help us today?
Think about it this way. The alchemists understood that transformation requires both internal and external work. When we look at modern challenges like climate change or social justice, we often focus only on external solutions. But the alchemical perspective suggests we need both personal and collective transformation.
That's really giving me a new perspective on how we might approach modern problems differently.
And you know what's really wild? Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics, wrote more about alchemy than he did about science. His personal library contained over 100 alchemical texts. He understood there was something profound in these ancient teachings.
So it's like we're rediscovering wisdom that was hidden in plain sight all this time.
Exactly. The Emerald Tablet's principle of interconnectedness is now being validated by quantum entanglement theory. When physicists talk about the observer effect, how consciousness influences physical reality, they're echoing what alchemists wrote centuries ago.
That's fascinating how these ancient insights keep finding new relevance.
And here's the thing, we're facing unprecedented challenges today that require both scientific innovation and deep personal transformation. Maybe it's time to look back at these alchemical texts, not as historical curiosities, but as guides for integrating spiritual wisdom with practical action.
Like finding a balance between technological progress and human development.
Precisely. The alchemists would say true transformation isn't just about changing the external world, it's about transforming ourselves in the process. And that might be exactly what we need to address our current global challenges.
You've really changed how I think about alchemy. It's not just about failed experiments, it's about understanding the nature of change itself.
And that might be their most valuable legacy, not the search for physical gold, but the understanding that transformation follows universal patterns, and that real change requires both inner and outer work. These insights are more relevant now than ever. Scientists just discovered that a drug found in the soil of one of Earth's most remote locations might hold the key to extending human lifespan.
You know what's fascinating about that discovery? The soil sample came from Easter Island, literally one of the most isolated places on Earth.
Well, that's what makes rapamycin such an incredible story. Here we have this compound found near those famous stone heads that's now revolutionizing our understanding of aging. The science behind it is mind-blowing.
Tell me more about how it actually works. What makes this particular compound so special?
So here's the thing. Rapamycin targets this protein called mTOR, which basically acts like the body's aging control center. Recent studies show that when they gave it to mice, it extended their lifespan by up to 14%. That's like adding over a decade in human years.
Oh, wow. And it's not just about living longer, right? The data suggests these mice stayed healthier throughout their extended lives.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers found that rapamycin doesn't just affect lifespan, it impacts something called Healthspan. The mice showed better cognitive function, improved heart health, and even enhanced immune responses well into their later years.
That's fascinating, but what about the epigenetic angle? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, think of epigenetics like a massive control panel sitting on top of our DNA. Recent studies from the Harvard Stem Cell Institute showed that we can actually manipulate these controls to potentially reverse aging at the cellular level.
You know what's incredible about that? Scientists can now predict someone's biological age within about 3-4 years, just by looking at their epigenetic markers.
And here's the mind-blowing part. Researchers at UCLA discovered that certain lifestyle factors can actually change these epigenetic markers in as little as 4 months. We're talking about diet, exercise, stress management, things we can control.
Though we should probably address the elephant in the room, the potential risks and challenges of manipulating these fundamental biological processes.
Absolutely right. Take rapamycin. While it shows incredible promise, it's also an immunosuppressant. Studies show it can increase infection risk by up to 20% in some patients. And with epigenetic modifications, we're really just beginning to understand the long-term implications.
So it's like we're walking a tightrope between potential benefits and unknown risks.
Well, that's what makes this field so fascinating. Recent economic projections suggest that if we could slow aging by just 7 years, it would save about $7 trillion in healthcare costs over the next 50 years.
Those numbers are staggering when you think about the broader implications for society.
And speaking of broader implications, let me share something interesting. Researchers at MIT found that combining rapamycin with certain epigenetic modulators could potentially create synergistic effects, amplifying the benefits while minimizing side effects.
That's really where the future seems to be heading, these integrated approaches to tackling aging from multiple angles.
You know what really gets me excited? The possibility that within our lifetime we might see aging become a treatable condition rather than an inevitable decline. Some experts predict we could see the first true anti-aging treatments approved within the next decade.
Though we should probably keep our expectations grounded in current scientific reality, right?
That's why it's crucial to understand that while this research is promising, we're still in the early stages. The latest data from clinical trials shows we're making progress, but there's still so much we don't understand about the aging process.
Well, this has been such an enlightening discussion about the cutting edge of aging research.
Indeed, and here's one final thought to leave everyone with. Imagine a future where we don't just live longer, but stay healthy, active, and engaged well into our later years. That's not science fiction anymore, it's becoming science fact.